What's good, everybody? It's your girl Amanda, and welcome back to my channel, or welcome if this is your first time. Today I'm going to be talking about Mayfair Witches, the latest TV adaptation of one of Anne Rice's widely loved works, and I'm going to tell you why Mayfair Witches, in my opinion, is the worst television show of 2023 so far. We're still in Q1, so we have no idea what's in store for us. But in this video, I'm going to give you a brief summary of the source material, then the actual show, followed by 5 reasons that this show flopped, and how you can avoid making these mistakes in your writing. Then at the end, I'm going to wrap it all up with my thoughts on what I would do if I was actually writing the show. So stay tuned if you're curious about how I would make the show better. And if you like this video and want to hear more writing advice from me, then go ahead and subscribe. I talk about writing, I talk about fantasy, and general publishing industry stuff here on my channel, so if all of that interests you, then go ahead and subscribe. Now, are you ready for some mess? So what is Mayfair Witches? For those of you who are completely unaware, Mayfair Witches is an adaptation of The Witching Hour, the first book in Anne Rice's Mayfair Witches series, chronicles, whatever, right? It is part of her larger Immortal Universe oeuvre. There are connections to the Vampire Chronicles and all of her other works, so it's all happening in the same universe. But The Witching Hour specifically introduces us to the Mayfair Witch dynasty. Now, these are super powerful, super wealthy, and well-connected people, and in addition to this monetary power, many of them also have magical powers. They're witches. They're witches. And now this is a family that is also a little odd. And by odd, I mean some of them have a penchant for incest, and some of them are bound to this ancient, supernatural, super powerful being called Lasher. We're not exactly sure whether Lasher is a demon or a ghost, but either way, he is powerful, and the ones who are bound to him get to use this power for their bidding and have him bring them jewelry and money. This is how the family got rich, and, do general other fuckery that he helps them with. In exchange for them having access to his powers, which amplify their own, the witches who are bound to him are part of this long, super long foretold prophecy in which Lasher would be reborn into this world as this even more powerful being, but he would be alive, so reborn into a human body. The ones who are bound to Lasher are bound, and there's a gold and emerald necklace that they wear that signifies, yo, I am Lasher's girl, or person, because most of the witches who are bound to Lasher are women, but there is one male in the family who does get bound to Lasher. And we get to know this family through moving back and forth between learning about the 12 past witches who were bound to Lasher, and then the 13th witch, Rowan. And Rowan is the one who is supposed to fulfill this prophecy and who is basically supposed to give birth to Lasher as a human being. So in addition to following Rowan and all of these other witches, we are also getting the perspective of Michael, who ends up becoming Rowan's husband and who has powers himself. He has a power of psychometry, which is the ability to touch an object or person and kind of be able to see a memory. It's the same power that my main character Mercury has in my Witchkind series. Now the show follows 2 characters. Firstly, it does follow Rowan, but it also follows another character named Cyprian, who is an amalgamation of Michael, as I mentioned in the source material, Rowan's husband, and another character who is part of this group called the Talamasca. Now, if you've read any of Anne Rice's stuff, you would know that the Talamasca is this magical organization that is tasked with just kind of watching and observing the supernatural world and recording all of the supernatural mess and drama that happens. So they combine these 2 characters into one, Cyprian. We meet Rowan in San Francisco just as her adoptive mother is diagnosed with cancer. And when her mother dies, Rowan is going through her things when she finds a photo of her mom as a young woman standing in front of this beautiful grand house in New Orleans. So Rowan is instantly curious because she's never been told anything about her biological family. Her mom has refused to tell her about where she comes from and about the magical powers that Rowan has. You see, Rowan can kill people with her mind, and she uses this power on her boss and a couple of other people just in the first episode alone. So she's determined to figure out more about her mom and more about where she comes from, so she boards a plane to New Orleans. When she gets there, she meets her biological mom briefly before her biological mom also dies. So really kind of rough moments for Rowan, losing both of her mothers within the span of, I guess, a couple of days. Now, she's quickly drawn into the Mayfair family. She goes to the funeral and she meets some of these Mayfairs, including Carlotta, who is her great aunt. She's a very stiff upper lip kind of woman, and she basically wants Rowan to leave New Orleans. She also meets her uncle Cortland, who is Carlotta's brother, who seems to be kind of the life of the party, and he wants Rowan to stay and get to know the family and all of this. And this is because both Carlotta and Cortland know about the prophecy. They know what Deirdre, Rowan's birth mother, who had been the last witch bound to Lasher, they know what her death means. That Rowan is next in line, that Lasher is or has chosen her. And while Carlotta is vehemently against this, she does not want Rowan to be bound to Lasher. In fact, she tries to pass Lasher on to somebody else, her black maid, who she tricks and who Lasher unalives, but we will talk about that later, put a pin in it. She's against this, right? And she even goes as far as to try to kill Rowan to prevent Lasher and Rowan from binding together. Cortland, on the other hand, is pro-Lasher. He's super pro Rowan and Lasher binding together. Now, amidst all of this, Rowan and Cyprian meet. And Cyprian, as part of his job of the Talamasca, is initially just supposed to be observing all of this. But he quickly gets entangled with Rowan and quickly develops feelings for her and she for him, which results in them sleeping together and her becoming pregnant. Rowan does get seduced by Lasher to a certain extent and starts wearing this necklace, but very quickly after, he's always around, he's always in her head, he's kind of always there, she realizes she does not want Lasher. So she arranges to have a ceremony performed to transfer him to another witch, which many of the Mayfair witches come together to do and are kind of all too happy for, because being bound to Lasher, being the designee, means that you are the one who gets access to the Mayfair witch manor. You get to live in this grand house, you get access to all of this wealth, and of course, Lasher's immense power. So many of them are pretty eager to be the one that Lasher chooses. And he chooses Rowan's cousin, Tessa. Now, she's a younger witch, she's very spunky, and she's very excited about this, in part because she plans to use Lasher's power to destroy a group of witch hunters that she has tried to talk to the family about, but nobody, not even Rowan, seems to be concerned with. It's in this moment when Tess tries to summon Lasher to destroy these witch hunters that we learn that Lasher does have a mind of his own. Even though he is bound to Rowan and is supposed to do her bidding, Lasher has moments where he's like, get someone else to do it. So Tessa gets captured, and another moment of Lasher doing his own thing is when he tries to kill Cyprian. You see, Cyprian is trying to figure out what this prophecy is, what it means for Rowan to be bound to Lasher, and in the process, he gets stuck in one of Lasher's memories. And the two men square up and talk about what or who is best for Rowan. Really, really love those scenes where you have men talking about what's best for a woman when the woman isn't even present, but I digress. Now, Tessa has been captured, and Rowan is wanting to fix it because she feels that it's her fault. She thinks that if she had just taken Tessa seriously, if she hadn't transferred Lasher, that maybe all of this wouldn't happen. So the family gets together to try to figure out where Tessa is, and they find out where she is. They all split up to try to find them, with Rowan getting there first. Now, Rowan, hearing Tessa scream, just goes in without anybody else and ends up killing all of these witch hunters. All except one. And as she and Tessa are trying to make their great escape, this witch hunter shoots them both, and Tessa unfortunately dies. Rowan, consumed by vengeance, grabs a necklace from Tessa's neck and calls Lasher to her, and then has Lasher kill this witch hunter. Shortly after that, Lasher shows Rowan how she's able to heal herself using her powers, and his, because now that they're bound, she's even more powerful, and the two have sex. Now remember, at this point, Rowan is pregnant. So she wakes up after her and Lasher have sex, and she's gone from a couple of weeks to about 9 months in the span of a matter of hours. So as she is running through all of these different memories and, seeing all of these different designees, this is the most overt hint that we get of these other designees in the show. The other times we just see pictures of them. We don't actually get to know much about them, unlike the source material. As she's doing this, Sip is trying to figure out what this prophecy is. He goes to one of the elders, Dolly Jean Mayfair, who is this older black woman and the one who led the ceremony to help Rowan get rid of Lasher, to try to get her help to figure out what this prophecy is. And he does. Basically, he finds out what I had mentioned, which is that Lasher's determined to be reborn. Rowan is the gateway, meaning she's the one who will give birth to Lasher as a human. And this super powerful being will be in this world, and nobody knows really how or what to do with it. As this is happening, Rowan then ends up back in our world and gives birth to baby Lasher. Cyprian is helpless. He's being held captive by his bosses, who are just basically saying, we watch, we observe, we can't stop any of this, it's already going to happen. And they've also captured Cyprian's sister Odette, who had been pregnant, and who they want to basically be the nursemaid for baby Lasher, because Cyprian convinces them to take the baby from Rowan, and they go, well, we're going to need somebody to nurse him, so why not just get Cyprian's sister? Cyprian doesn't know that they've captured her, though. So after all of these different things happen, Rowan and Cyprian have a bit of a standoff. Cyprian at first is trying the subtle approach and asking her, why don't you let me hold the baby? You're tired, I can help you. And Rowan denies him and says no. After a while, he says you can't control him, with Rowan turning to him and saying, you can't control me. And she then walks off with a swirl of lightning and crows flying above her, and that's how the season ends. So now I'm going to get into the reasons why this show was trash. So reason number 1, the handling of race is terrible. Cyprian, his sister, Dolly Jean, and the maid are all black. And even though the show cast other characters of color, all of them end up basically being completely underdeveloped, and their entire role is to be the magical cleanup crew to help further the white character's story. Most of the time, further Rowan's story. As I mentioned, Carlotta tricks her maid Delphine into trying to bind with Lasher, and Lasher ends up possessing her and having her unalive herself. Dolly Jean is the sage-like magical black woman who performs this ritual, but we don't get to know anything about her other than she's an older member of the Mayfair family. Cyprian is the ultimate magical black character in this because he's constantly putting himself in harm's way to save Rowan. They don't even know each other like that, and we don't know Sip like that. We don't really get to know much about him other than this power, and the reason why we know about this power is because that's what he uses to help save Rowan. It would have been really great, given the fact that we see a lot of these scenes from his perspective, to get to know more about him, but Rowan is also pretty underdeveloped, and I will talk about that in a moment, so I can't really be surprised that they didn't develop Cyprian. Finally, his sister, Odette, is only pregnant because they need a nursemaid. She's not in the actual source material, and so it really does seem like the only reason why they made her pregnant was to have that scene of, let's just use her as a nursemaid. And if you know anything about the history of this country, black women, especially black enslaved women, were forced to be nursemaids for the people who enslaved them. So having this be essentially her entire purpose of the show really, really left a bad taste in my mouth. So all that said, how can you avoid this? Well, first things first, take some time to research and understand the historical context of the marginalized groups that you're wanting to write, and understand how tropes like the magical character of color, the black sidekick, etc. can be harmful. Now, I did do a video about 4 toxic tropes that you can avoid, and I will link it up here in the cards, and that will help you understand the context of why the magical character of color trope is harmful. Additionally, higher sensitivity readers who belong to the marginalized group that you're writing about, and listen to them. It's not enough to hire them or to ask for their help. You have to listen to the advice that they're giving you. And remember that no group is a monolith, so that's why I suggest having more than one person from said group read and help you with your content. And please, whatever you do, do not have the only marginalized character in your book be the villain. I'm sure you know why. Mayfair Witches issue number 2. The pacing is bad. We have no idea how much time passes between Rowan arriving in New Orleans and Rowan giving birth to Lasher. And even though they fast track the pregnancy on purpose, that is fine. We have no context for anything else in the show and how long any of that stuff takes. She has this whole life in San Francisco, which she keeps reminding people she wants to get back to, and yet we have no idea how long she's been in the city, and she's making no moves to try to fly back to San Francisco. So that is an issue. Additionally, because we have no idea of the pacing, the relationship that she develops with Cyprian feels like insta-love. It's giving trauma bond. And it doesn't feel authentic. And not just because, in my opinion, the actors don't have chemistry, but because we have no sense of how much time is going from them meeting to them fucking. And there are scenes that stretch on way too long, and scenes that weren't really needed. There's a scene in which Rowan tours a hospital with her cousin, and the only reason why that scene is there is for Rowan to have a vision of Lasher and her cousin to ask, "What's happening? Are you seeing Lasher?" That scene could have happened anywhere else. It didn't need to happen at this hospital. So it's things like that that really are jarring and don't feel needed, especially with the fact that this show is only 8 episodes long. They definitely did not make use of their time. Now, the order in which we find things out is off. We find out about this prophecy, explicitly what this prophecy is, in the penultimate episode, and I think that that does us a disservice, because it would have been great for us to know what it is at the beginning and then watch Rowan as she struggles against what this prophecy is, only for her to run headfirst into it. So, how can you avoid making these same mistakes? Create an outline or some kind of synopsis of your story. And if you find yourself focusing too much on one scene, that's a sign for you to consider trimming it. If you're worried about the pacing of your book, when you hand your book to beta readers, make a note. Can you please look out for the pacing? Write a timeline of the events while drafting. That's something that helped me immensely when I was working on the second draft of In the House of Transcendence, because all of the events happen in just over a month, and it was a lot that needed to happen. So I had to write out what was happening day by day, because there are scenes that are happening at night, scenes happening in the morning, things that happen overnight, and I wanted to make sure that it all made sense. Consider writing a timeline. Doesn't matter where you are in your drafting process, it will help. Mayfair Witches issue number 3. Rowan is written inconsistently. She has no definable arc from episode 1 to the end. She doesn't start out as this meek, shrinking Violet character, so that by the end, when she tells Cyprian, "You can't control me," it feels like a payoff. We have a good for her moment because she struggled to stand up for herself so often. That's not her character. She seems capable of standing up for herself when it comes to men, but not women in her life. And the times where she should stand up for herself, she doesn't. And the times where she should be a little more laid back, she's giving, "I'm a doctor, don't you know who I am" vibes. So that is very spotty. Additionally, we don't know what her motivations are for staying in New Orleans. We have no idea what she even really desires for herself. Obviously, she's trying to figure out who she is, but we don't know if it's because she's upset that she was given away as a kid, or if she's wanting to get to know this family that she never got to know. We don't really get to know that, and her motivations for anything else in her life. So it all feels really unclear, this journey that she's going on. And as I mentioned, she keeps saying that she wants to leave New Orleans. We don't even see her trying to book a flight to get back to the Bay Area. So that's just a moment of, you're telling us that this is what this character wants, but you're not showing her actually doing that. And she lacks common sense. There's a moment where she takes a drink from a stranger that she doesn't know for no real reason, and she doesn't handle high stress situations well, but she's supposed to be a surgeon. It's just not believable to me that somebody who's a surgeon would do some of the things that she's doing. And we don't get to know much about her. So again, we don't know what her desires are. We don't know what's at stake for her. If she stays in New Orleans, if she goes home, if she binds with Lasher, we don't really get to know any of this. So how can you avoid this? Create character profiles. Create a character profile and write out what your character desires, what they want versus what they need, and what's at stake for them if they do or don't get the things that they want or need. And write out what are those obstacles, what's preventing them from getting the things that they want or need. And I say want versus need because they're not always the same thing. Your character could, let's say, want to fall in love, but what they need is to learn to love themselves, right? Those are two different things, and that can also help you with any kind of conflict that the character is feeling, because sometimes what we want and what we need don't always align. Additionally, and this specifically goes for those writing fantasy, sci-fi, or horror, let us get to know your character outside of these fantastical events that they're in or outside of their magical powers. Yes, it's great writing witches, that's wonderful, but they're not just their powers. So what else do they like? Are they a huge fan of dance? Do they love lattes? Are they afraid of the dark? Tell us some of these other things about them that will make them feel fully realized instead of just a two-dimensional character. And finally, remember that whether it's your main character, the sidekick, the love interest, or even your villain, these characters need to be fleshed out and have their own motivations. You might not need to give them the same treatment that you give your main character, but we still need to feel like these are well-rounded characters. Mayfair Witches issue number 4. There's no clarity on who the actual villain is in this show. So we have Lasher on one hand, and then the witch hunters on the other hand. Now the witch hunters are not in the actual source material. They're made up for the show. And in my opinion, the show suffers for having this storyline because number one, it was way too easy to do away with these witch hunters, and number two, Lasher should have been the big capital V villain in this show. It took a lot of time away from him and the things that he had going on to focus on these witch hunters. And on that note, it's very unclear whether Lasher is an actual villain or an anti-hero, because there's moments where he's terrorizing Rowan and doing bad things, but then there are other moments where he's actually helpful, like he helps her heal and things like that. And because it's not clear whether he's a villain or not, his motivations are unclear to us. And that also is because we don't find out about this prophecy, the full extent of it, until the last episode or so. And his powers, to me, were a little bit more lackluster. They were very kind of parlor tricks, magician-y kind of vibes, instead of the powers of somebody who could actually fuck your shit up. I never was terrified of Lasher or anything that he could do, because in my mind, Rowan felt more powerful than him. So I was thinking, why does she even need this guy if she's more powerful? And the writers made it so that Lasher was jealous of Cyprian, which is laughable because for a centuries-old extremely powerful being who's been playing the long game of his rebirth again for centuries, the fact that he would be jealous of a human man didn't make sense, especially because he needs said human man to knock up Rowan in order for her to give birth to him. So the fact that this entire time he seems to have beef with Cyprian doesn't make any sense. As I mentioned, the show would definitely have benefited from just having Lasher be the villain, not having these witch hunters, and have anybody that's aligned with him, like Uncle Cortland, be an antagonist. And, in my opinion, just from a show standpoint, I definitely think the actor who played him missed the mark in his portrayal, because Lasher to me was neither terrifying nor sexy. He was giving Vegas musician who's hitting on you at the bar at 2 in the morning instead of this all-powerful being who's been, like I said, playing the long game in order to be reborn again as a human. So how can you avoid these mistakes? Well, no matter the size of the cast, no matter how many characters you have, we should still know what or who the big capital V villain is. That's not to say that they have to be explicitly revealed ever, or that it has to be one person, right? If you have a book about zombies, we know that the zombies are probably the villain in this case. But we just need to know what is the force that's opposing your main character or characters and stopping them from getting to their goals or surviving, getting what they want / need. Now, as I mentioned, your villains should be as well-rounded and developed as your main character. Create a character profile for them, filling out their wants, needs, desires, and what it would mean for them to get the thing that they want, right? So, as an example, if your main villain, his goal is world domination, why? Why does he want to dominate the world? Is it just because he thinks he'd do it better? Is it because he wants all the power? Think about that and think about what kind of long game this villain might be playing in order to get the thing that they're wanting. And finally, don't overcrowd the space. It's cool to have multiple antagonists, maybe some goons who are on your villain's payroll, or, bullies who are bullying your main character or something like that. But there should always be one capital V villain, but we should always know who or what the big overarching capital V villain / villains are in your work. And if you want some more tips on writing villains, I will link my video on how to write a villain up here in the cards. And finally, Mayfair Witches issue number 5. The world building is spotty. For those of you who have been here before, you know world building is my shit. It's one of my favorite things to do in prep for a book, and I firmly believe that whether you are writing romance or fantasy, you need to do a little bit of world building. So when it comes to the show, as I mentioned, the witch hunters, which are added just for the show, to me, gave me nothing. They added nothing to the story. It felt very much like the writers wanted to write analogs for MAGA alt-right people who are, in their minds, disenfranchised and scapegoat a certain group and blame them for all the things that are wrong. So basically, it's like they took alt-right MAGAs and went, okay, instead of black people or the queer community, we're gonna have it be witches. And that's just not good enough. It's not enough because we don't know their motivations aside from that. We don't know any historical context as to why they would be feeling this way. And also, none of the other Mayfair witches were pressed about these witch hunters. None of them seemed to even really care or be warning anybody, hey, don't do your magic this way, don't do this, that, and the third. And so it just felt like if they don't care, why should we? Obviously, they're not this huge big threat if none of these other witches seem to care about them. Likewise, when it comes to the prophecy and the binding to Lasher, we don't really get to know those specifics until the penultimate episode, and the show suffers from it. And the way that the prophecy, like what actually it is revealed, is so cheesy. Basically, Cyprian, because his power is psychometry, he touches this object, which is this kind of doll made out of the bones and teeth and hair of all the designees, and he just so happens to see the exact memory that he needs, in which one of his designees is asking Lasher what this prophecy thingy is. And I had issues with that for multiple reasons. Number one, it's too convenient. This man has talked about how his powers overwhelm him. He's always wearing gloves. So now suddenly he's able to get the exact right memory at the exact right time. That's issue number one. Issue number two is, why would this designee be needing to have this ritual thingy whatever, asking Lasher what this prophecy whatever it is? First of all, why wouldn't Suzanne, who is the first witch to bind with Lasher, have passed this information down to her family, to her kin? And even if she didn't, why would Lasher tell them? Wouldn't it be better for his cards to be held closer to his chest? So how can you avoid all of this? First of all, world building is key here. So I suggest creating A book Bible, even if it's one page or multiple pages, that is all of the details about your world. Especially if it's fantasy and you're adding magic or supernatural beings into our world. What is the history there? Have they always existed? Is this something new? Are people just finding out about it? Does anybody know about these witches? If they do, were there witch hunts? If there's vampires, do people know about these vampires? Are they hiding in an underground? What would happen if they get discovered? Have people gotten discovered before? Has it changed our history? Were historical figures witches? All of these things and answering all of these questions will help your world feel lived in, even if most of the stuff doesn't make it to the page. This is also true if you are doing any social commentary or allegory. We need to have fully realized reasons as to why, let's say, as this example, witch hunters are now re-emerging in our world and suddenly aware of witches and that they are real and exist and are hunting them. To use an example from my own works, in my Witchkind series, it's witches versus vampires, and they've been beefing for millennia. I wrote a whole parable that discussed why witches and vampires hate each other, and that has informed the entire series. And without all of that specifics actually entering into the book, the writing still reflects this. And creating a book Bible can also help you if you are writing a mystery, because it can help you plot out the who, what, why, where, how, the motivations of your characters, and all of the specifics so that the reveal happens in a fulfilling way for your audience. We've gotten to the portion where I tell you what I would do if I were writing Mayfair Witches. So the first thing I would do is I would make the show 13 episodes long. Each episode would follow a different designee halfway, and then the other half would be Rowan's story. So by the end of the first episode, we would have met Suzanne Mayfair. We would have seen her bind to Lasher and the specifics of what this binding means, and we would have met Rowan and she'd be on the plane to New Orleans. I would stick with the source material and having Michael and the Talamasca member be two different people. I would lean more into the horror, the Southern Gothic vibes of it all, and have the house actually be dilapidated a little bit as it is in the source material. I would have more quirky, weird kind of things with the family, maybe a little like Wednesday type vibes. I would definitely cast a different actor to play Lasher, probably maybe Michael Malarkey, who's the actor who played Enzo in Vampire Diaries. I would probably also cast a different actress than Alexandra Daddario. I like her, she didn't give to me, so I probably would have cast someone else. I would definitely add more glamour. I would want more makeup, better costumes, definitely different hair. It just all of that read really flat to me. Like, I read a review that said the costumes were off the rack, and to me it just gave Old Navy chic, and I really wish that the costume department had done a little bit better of a job when it came to the show. I would remove the witch hunters, make Lasher the main villain of the show, and anybody else aligned with him, like Uncle Cortland, be the antagonists. And I wouldn't have Rowan meet him until the very last episode of the season, so we would know who he is because we would see him in the scenes with the other designees, and maybe we would see him in Rowan's story. Maybe he's a shadow in the dark, or he leaves his name written in dust somewhere, or she gets a flash of him, but they don't actually meet until the 13th episode. I think that would give Lasher the proper buildup that he deserves as this villain, and it would help Rowan be a little bit more intrigued and reel her in. I would include more of the Mayfair clan in modern day as well, and have her get to know them. I would not have Rowan pregnant by the end of the season. I would have her and Michael just starting to fall for each other when she actually meets Lasher and is intrigued. That's what I would do if Mayfair Witches was written by me. Anyway, that's it for me. I hope y'all enjoyed this video. I hope that you found these tips to be helpful, and I hope that you found my synopsis and takedown of the show helpful as well. If y'all want to hear any more reviews from me, if you want any other writing tips from me, please let me know. I'm always happy to hear from y'all in terms of what you want me to talk about and what you find to be helpful. And you can find links to my social media in the description below. You can find links to buy all of these books in the description below as well. And I will catch y'all later. Bye!